Thank you for joining the 7th Town Hall and our Back to School in the Time of COVID series. Tonight's guests are Leeda, Beha, Director of Child Nutrition at Bethel School District, and Leanne Echo, Child Nutrition Services Director for the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. We've collected questions from constituents that we'll be using to drive this discussion. If you're watching this live on Facebook and have a question, please ask it in the comments section of this video and we'll get to your questions as well. Before we turn to questions, I'm going to hand it over to Congressman Heck and then our two guests for opening comments. Congressman Heck.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you all for joining us. This is our 7th in the series Back to School discussions about responding to the COVID crisis. It's our final episode, and it's a good one. It is also our 28th episode since April on our state's overall response to COVID. Tonight, we are pleased to have two experts at child nutrition, both of whom work in the public school system. Leeda, obviously, at the local level, and Leanne, who is the director of all of this statewide at Superintendent of Public Instruction, Chris Reichdahl's shop. We're glad to have you both. Let me start by asking the obvious question. Kids don't learn very well when they're hungry, do they?
No, sure don't.
And we actually have research to back that up, don't we?
Mm-hmm. Lots of research, but I think anybody can think about your own self and during the workday. And if your stomach starts rumbling, how well can you pay attention to the task at hand?
At some point, our nation and certainly our state embarked on a journey to make sure that being hungry was not a factor in our students' ability to learn. Tell us a little bit about that journey and how it is that the program was initiated originally and has grown over time. Leanne?
Yeah, well, you know, it actually was passed into law by President Harry Truman in 1946. But for me, the really interesting thing is not the purpose of our program, and that is not only to feed hungry kids, but also to support American agriculture. And I think especially for Washington, being that we're such an agricultural state, some people don't realize that. And in fact, one of the kind of regulations around our program is that all the food that is purchased to feed children through our programs has to be domestically grown. So I think that's a pretty important fact and one that people don't really understand. But yeah, it was, you know, like, as you mentioned, it's not hard for everybody to understand that kids do better in school and learn better when they're not hungry. And at the time that the program started, it was an even bigger issue than immediate hunger, but poor nourishment being found in all children. And in fact, as servicemen were entering the service, they were found that they were severely malnourished in many ways. And that was the basis of a lot of these programs. But again, I kind of go back to, you know, we go back to school, in normal times, kids enter the classroom and they have paper and pencils and everything to make them successful. But if you have a kid that's stomach is hungry, hasn't eaten since the previous evening, or even if you have growing children, or if you can remember back, heck, few hours and your stomach is grumbling when your body is growing so quickly, it's really hard to concentrate. So it just makes good sense to put nutrition as an integral part of our school system.
So Leanne, two questions before we toss this to Leeda. First of which is, as I recall, we have about 1.1 million children in the public school system in the state, approximately. Help us understand the scope of the food service program as it relates to feeding children before or during school.
Yeah, so it's always a little interesting because of how we gather our information. We gather it more around meals versus actually students. But on an average day, nearly half of the students enrolled in Washington schools are eating a school meal. As we get into this a little bit more, we can maybe talk a little bit more about the students that qualify for free or reduced price meals, but a lot of those students eating meals are paying students also. Again, parents are busy, parents are at work, and kids are hungry. So the meal service is utilized and can be utilized by all students in the student body.
If half the students eat the food that is prepared at the district level, what percent of those are on free and reduced price lunch?
Well, overall, Washington State runs about 41% of students qualify for free or reduced price meals.
And do they all participate in the program?
It varies. I think it's definitely a goal of all of our local level to try to ensure access to those students that do qualify for free and reduced price meals.
If I'm doing my math correctly, however, Leanne, if half eat the school prepared food and 41% of all students qualify for free and reduced price lunches or meals, that would suggest to me that approximately 80% of those who eat the meals are participants in free and reduced price meals. Does that at least sound as though it's in the ballpark?
That would be in the ballpark, correct?
Leeda, let's bring this down to the district level.
Sure.
You actually started providing food a couple of weeks ago, even though you have distant learning. So first of all, before we talk about how it's been in the last 2 weeks, take us back to March when we basically sent students home and what you did to respond to that in providing for the nutrition of the students who were no longer coming to school and being able to make themselves
At school
have access
eat.
to the, yeah,
Correct.
right.
Yeah, so when Superintendent Reichdahl deemed child nutrition services as an essential service or essential workers, none of my staff were really surprised because we see kids, hungry kids every day. And in fact, one of my elementary school kitchen leads, she had called me about 2 weeks prior to us going into the COVID feeding model. And she said, what are we going to do if we have to close school? She says, what about my kids who I feed every day? And she had volunteered to make food for them and take it to their houses because she knew how critical access to nutritious meals is for our students. I think the other thing, Leanne and I are both dietitians, and when you look at the effects of malnutrition or lack of sustenance for growing children, it has a different impact on them, their growth and development, their mental health, anxiety, all of those things, not just while they're in school, but their overall health and well-being. So our program, whether we're working under National School Lunch or Breakfast, or right now we're operating our district, we chose to operate under the Summer Food Service Program, which allows us to use this emergency curbside feeding model. So on March 17th, which was St. Patrick's Day, we served our regular shepherd's pie, big hearty meal for our kids and sent them off when the school closure happened. And then the next day we launched 10 Meals in Motion sites at the district, operating under the emergency feeding program or the summer food service program, which allowed us to be able to provide a breakfast and a lunch meal curbside to protect the students and their families, but also to protect our employees and maintain that social distancing. So we launched the very next day.
And what kind of participation did you have?
Initially, we started out around 1,300 meals a day. Now, to give you perspective, our district normally serves about 15,000 meals each day. That geared up, and our average through the whole last spring was about 8,200 meals per day. So we were serving about half of our student population at those meal sites. As those were established, then we also, Bethel is a very geographically large school district. We're 202 square miles. A lot of our parity districts, their size is, within 35 square miles. So we were concerned about how do we get food out to the kids who, can't get to a meal site. So we launched 10 bus routes that are actually routed using daily bus route pickups at their regular bus stops. As you'll see, a lot of my colleagues are using bus models too, but they are maybe going to apartment complexes where there's a lot of kids, and then they can come and give out the meals. So ours are actually routed by individual family and household.
So if you averaged 8,200, how many of those were delivered versus how many were picked up?
We had about 550 students on the bus routes. And if students approached the bus and they weren't actually routed, we had extra meals to provide. And then we also gave them a meal card that had the information on to get routed on the bus route so that we could plan our numbers accordingly.
So that was your experience in the spring. What's your experience been the last 2 weeks during the first 2 weeks of school, Leeda?
So today we served just under 8,500 meals. It's the 9th day of school. We are launching the bus routes because we had to vet those again and reroute. We're launching those on Monday, and we have 7 buses that will be doing projected right now, about 450 additional meals to students out in the community.
In addition to both being dietitians, you're both proud Cougar graduates, as I recall. In fact, they're at the same time, albeit 1 year apart. Leanne, you can go Cougs, you betcha. I had Kirk Schultz on the program. He was one of my 7 back to school conversations, and that was pretty fascinating. Leanne, what's your job? Tell us what it means to be the head of this for the state.
Well, I would say our duty is to administer these United States Department of Agriculture programs. So that means that we're interpreting and USDA guidelines and regulations. And then the money also flows through our agency. When the schools serve meals, then they submit those claims to us and we pay out on a per meal basis. But that's officially, I would say, if the thing I'm most proud of is supporting people like Leeda, who are out there on the front lines serving kids. And that was really important to me and our whole department this spring when, our life kind of turned upside down. Their number one thing was to support schools in their efforts to feed kids. And we just kept saying, you're on the front lines, you're feeding kids, we're behind you. We will figure this out. Leeda spoke to it, but to me, it's just incredible. And I don't think people understand that schools were announced closed on one day and school food service staff were out feeding kids the next. And, like Leeda said, the incredible thing about it was she was planning on feeding, spaghetti and things that don't go into a bag real well. So they had to absolutely throw all their plans out the window and shift. And we're talking about food. So food that she had ordered and planned for months ahead, and some that was already on site, she suddenly had to serve a different menu. But again, they were just incredible and just rose to the occasion. And during this whole time, I think school food service staff have just been troopers. I think too, is that you hear the stories from families, what it's meant, not only nutritionally, but it was the connection to the school. Those kids just all of a sudden, no more school is tough. We heard stories from so many families that were like, it was a break for mom to drive to the school. And then the kids were so excited to go to a school, see a familiar face, have some kind of normalcy in this new world that they were experiencing.
Yeah, I agree with Leanne. Our staff, one of the things to kind of unite them, and because they were all scared, my staff were scared to be at work when everybody's going home. And, they just, their heart is in child nutrition and feeding students. I quoted Mr. Rogers many times, if something scary in the world is happening, his mother said, look for the helpers. And that's what my staff did. They showed up, they were dressed in costumes, they brought plastic Easter egg. I mean, they made it fun. They made the distance learning, it was their break in the day. We were really, one of the things that was really important to me, and we are blessed with this fabulous facility and the equipment that we have, we're serving hot lunch every day. And part of that, and my philosophy, is that food is so much more than nutrition too. And like Leanne said, it gave that security and that familiarity. And we are just serving fan favorites. On a normal month, I would serve chicken nuggets once a month. We're serving them more often, but you watch our Facebook page and, you know, parents are like, what's for lunch tomorrow? You know, oh, that's my student, my child's favorite, you know, and that is intentional through this time. And, you know, and also, you know, we wanted to give enough of a meal service period where parents would have a chance to get that break and that lunch break from being on, you know, getting on Zoom and working with their kids. And that's what we found it was happening, you know. And then my staff are amazing. We had one, in fact, she was the one that had called me and said, can I drive food to my kids? Like, we're going to figure something else out. But yesterday she's like, I colored my hair, and she sent me a picture and she had crayons in her hair, you know, and that's how she was giving out meals at the curb. So they're really trying to be that hope for our community, and they're just incredible. I can't say enough about what my team is doing, and they keep showing up. And you know, we're not through this yet. We're going to be you know, Superintendent Siegel is going to be meeting with the superintendents in Pierce County on Monday to kind of look at what our next move is going to be, which for Bethel will most likely be a AM, PM elementary schedule, possibly.
Hold that thought. We'll get to the future in a minute. It
Okay.
strikes me that one of the other benefits among all the benefits you just listed is that it kept the bus drivers employed.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think that sometimes people overlook the fact that if you have a skilled workforce doing something like that, which requires commercial certification, and all of a sudden you say, well, you're not going to have any work for 3, 6, 9 months, they're going to go find other jobs. And then when you are able to reopen, how are you going to get the kids to and from school if
Right.
these people have migrated to other jobs? So there were all manner of benefits, it seems to me, spinning out of it. But I got to ask the hard question, Leeda. If you're serving half of what you did when it was in person, what about the other half, many of whom you know would have qualified for free and reduced price meals and have a strong need for this? What effort, if any, is underway to reach out and make sure they know this is available to you? Because as unbelievably quick that turnaround was, as unbelievably muscular getting to 8,500 is, that's leaving 7,000 out.
Right. Well, and realizing we serving about 15,000 meals a day. That includes breakfast and lunches, and our enrollment is just over 20,000 students. So our free and reduced rate last spring was about 48%. This fall, it's about 47%. So I'm hoping with the plans that we have in place that we're reaching the most food insecure households. The other thing we're trying to balance is, you know, as we move into the future, not to overextend our staff in the models that we're doing. So right now we're easily able to do 12 meal sites, which we expanded from 8 last spring, and the bus routes. You know, as we move forward, we have plans to do 5-day meal boxes, you know, and changing as our educational service model changes due to the changes with COVID. So, you know, I'm really thinking, okay, if I'm a parent, what do I need? And right now, I think we're able to cover those with those bus routes and then the other.
So you mentioned that it's 47% now. What is the cost if you have no subsidy for breakfast and lunch in Bethel School District for a meal?
Right now, we actually changed our meal price because we're giving the same food to the elementary and secondary students. So it's $3 for a breakfast, and it'll be $1.80 for lunches when we go back to the national school lunch program model.
Why is lunch cheaper?
I'm sorry.
Why is lunch? You said $1.80.
Oh, sorry. That breakfast is $1.80. Lunch is $3.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Very much. You mentioned the lady who put the crayons in her hair.
Yeah.
I defy anyone watching this program who went through a school system at which a meal was served not to have a fond memory of one of the people who worked there. And I think it's important to step back and remind people that that's part of the entire educational experience of a youngster.
Mm-hmm.
And it oftentimes is a very valuable part of that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Lauren, why don't we see if we've had some questions either pre-submitted or submitted while we've had this conversation?
Thank you. This first question is coming from Antoinette, who is watching live. Antoinette wrote, "Childhood hunger isn't the only hunger going on. Parents also go hungry just so their kids can eat." Antoinette also thanked you all for your work and said her grandchildren get their meals delivered by bus. Congressman Heck, would you like to take the first stab at the answer?
What was the question?
That childhood hunger isn't the only hunger going on. Parents also go hungry so their kids can eat.
Absolutely. Antoinette, thank you again. I believe you've made all 28 town halls, and you have in each and every instance asked a good question, and I am grateful. Yes, we are living in arguably the most severe economic circumstance since the Great Depression. It remains to be seen how long these unemployment levels, which are hovering just below 10% officially, I think when you count those that are no longer looking for work and are not part of the official tabulation, that it is indeed over 10%. Among people who are members of communities of color, it's significantly higher than that because of the unfortunate and difficult burden of last in, first out, by which I mean those that are most marginally attached to the workforce are the last to participate in it. And they began participating as our nation's unemployment level was driven down to 3.5%. But when the unemployment rate goes up, they're the first ones who have left it. And they're the ones with the least resources to be able to sustain this. So you're correct. It's part of the reason, Antoinette, why I think it's so important that Congress acts to pass some version of CARES 4.0 or the HEROES Act. The HEROES Act, again, is that $3.2 trillion measure that passed the House in May, and which is circling over Senator Mitch McConnell's desk as we speak. Negotiations underway, and they're very difficult between the Senate and the House to step forward and provide some additional assistance to American families who are being hammered by this recession and by COVID. There are several measures in the HEROES Act that would address specifically the need to provide additional income or put cash in the pocket of people who are struggling, including providing $1,200 per person for each household making less than $75,000, an extension of the unemployment weekly bonus of $600 a week. Economists now have already looked back on the first period of time for which this was provided and concluded definitively that it helped avert a significant increase in the number of people living in poverty. But now that it has expired, that's going to increase. In addition to that, of course, the HEROES Act contained a very large amount of money for local and state government aid that could be used to supplant the revenue that they have lost as a consequence of the economic downturn. That will enable them to provide funds and services and programs to the vulnerable. We're fighting for that, Antoinette, and we're going to keep fighting for it because you're right. Some parents are in that circumstance where they don't have enough to get by. Lauren.
Thank you. This next comment comes from Nancy and Lacey. I'm appalled that the USDA wants the school lunch programs to return this school year to the pricing model based on family income. The effects of COVID on the economy have left so many parents without a job and without ability to keep their children fed. To reinstall this complicated system to feed school children is simply cruel. Ms. Echo, would you like to respond first?
Yeah, so I think Leeda kind of alluded to this, but it gets a little complicated. But to put it simply, to recap, when we operate the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program, we provide meals based on each child's individual economic status and if they qualify for free and reduced price meals. So if a student qualifies for free, of course, their meal is free of charge. Reduced, the family pays a much reduced price. And then students that don't qualify pay that full price that Leeda was mentioning earlier. During the pandemic this last spring, USDA allowed programs to switch to an emergency summer feeding program, and then also extended some waivers, which in essence led us as a state to be able to operate all locations to feed all children, regardless of income, and we didn't need to look at that. And it wasn't just limited to students in the K-12 system. It was all children ages 0 to 18. As we approached the school year, USDA was directing us to return to the national school lunch and school breakfast model, basing that decision on the fact that this spring schools were closed, while this fall, even though they're operating in a remote manner, that they are open. I agree. I was concerned about the complications that this would cause for our school food service staff and just the logistics of providing those meals, and then also perhaps limiting access as we do the paperwork piece of making sure each individual student qualifies and what category they fall under. There was some concern by USDA as they relayed that information to us that they did not have the authority to extend these programs nor the funds to extend them. But about 2 weeks ago now, maybe 3 weeks ago, they did end up extending the waivers to allow us to operate this program where we can feed everybody at least through December 31st. So we will see what happens there. But I agree there is better access under these programs and also just administratively easier and more responsive to COVID and social distancing when we're able to provide meals to all children at no cost.
Good question, Nancy. And by the way, we weighed in on that issue to help encourage USDA to make the right decision. Leeda, I think it's time to pivot to looking ahead. Basically, what's happening is that the incidence of infection per 100,000 population has been declining. When it was above 75 per 100,000, it led Dr. Anthony Chen, the public health officer in Pierce County, to say, don't do school. I'm ordering you to have all distance learning or all remote. It's since come down. I think it's in the 55, 57 range.
59.9 yesterday morning.
59.9.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is a measure I suspect you check every day,
Yes.
but it unlocks the door, if not opens it, as he has indicated, to the possibility of returning to some form of limited in-person instruction. And I'm wondering what it is that Bethel School District is looking at. And then I want to ask you about what food service will look like in that context.
Well, what we're looking at is if and Ms. Superintendent Siegel is very, the health and safety of the students and our staff is his top priority. So he is taking his direction straight from the health department. And, but when it is recommended that we are able to return to an in-person educational model, what Bethel is looking at is elementary school students would go back into the buildings and they would be on an AM PM schedule. So half of the students would do an AM session and then half of the students would do a PM session.
5 days a week?
5 days a week.
And where does food service fit into that? Since it comes
So,
between AM and PM.
right. So we, operating this program right now, like Leanne explained, we would continue, obviously, the secondary students would still continue with remote learning. So we need to make sure that we're providing them the same opportunity for meals as the students in school. So essentially, to keep the students safe and fed as they come into school, our plan is they will do their health check online before they get to the buildings. Before they get on the school buses, they have to be cleared to come to the buildings. And so they would come in and we would provide their breakfast and they would take it to their classroom because they are trying to keep the students separate from one another. So, they would have their group of their classroom essentially. And so they would come in, grab their meal and go straight to class.
And the other half that aren't there in the morning would continue to have delivery?
No, what would happen is on the way home, the kids, we will give them a bag with their lunch in it and take it home on the bus. Then when the second shift of students comes in, or the PM students, we provide them with their lunch and then their breakfast to take home for the next day.
Ah, very good.
And then we would continue with, we're looking at doing, continuing with 5 meal and motion sites to serve those secondary students. And we are planning for the option, and it would be a sign up. So we would be able to know ahead of time on a 5-day meal box where they would come, parents would have an opportunity to come and pick up 5 days worth of meals, just like they kind of, if you've seen like videos of at the food banks, they pop their trunk open, we check their name off and then they would go. But
so Leeda, the children would be in a classroom with half the number of students as usual, therefore socially distanced.
correct.
But you can't eat with a mask on.
Nope.
What other measures, if any, will be employed to assure that that is as safe as possible? Are any necessary?
Yeah, having half the number of students, they have their safety check protocols. Students will be basically kept in, I don't want to say in isolation, but within their own classroom group. So even, not crossing in the hallways, going to the restroom, those types of things. It's going to be very scheduled and very controlled environment.
Leanne, we have 295 school districts, give or take one.
Yeah.
I well imagine that they have locally developed different approaches to all of this. Leeda just described Bethel. Are there other examples that are somewhat different that demonstrate how it is that people are adapting locally?
Well, Leeda's kind of employing many of the tactics. She just happens to be taking on all of them, where other districts have just chosen one. But we have heard a lot about AB schedules, if not a morning and an afternoon.
Excuse me, Leanne. AB schedule means morning, afternoon?
Or so a group of kids come Monday, Tuesdays, the other group comes on Thursday, Fridays, and Wednesday is a cleaning day. So different scenarios like that. Yeah, but kind of globally, we're all referring that as an AB schedule. So as Leeda described, that looks a little bit different, but as she was saying, you would definitely take advantage of the kids being there and allowing them to take meals home to cover for the periods that they're not with you. Meals in motion, or what's referred to as grab and go, is very common. And then the meal boxes, where they do more than one meal at a time, is also being employed. But like Leeda was saying, I think some of the challenges around it's food we're dealing with. So you've got, if it's hot, you got to keep it hot. And if it's cold, you got to keep it cold. And, it's already kind of tough to feed that many kids when they're coming into a cafeteria, but now you're bagging it up, and you need to store all that. You need to prep it, and then you need to store it until you serve it. So all of those are challenges. I think many of our schools over the years, our kitchen facilities have shrunk and become very small. And I think that this pandemic has shed a light on that. It's really hard to produce that many meals when you have a shoebox size kitchen and you're also trying to social distance your food service staff.
So the former businessman in me couldn't help but think about how Leeda turned around delivery as it relates to supply of packaging.
Yeah.
You went from trays and plates to something else. Was it hard to source those? Because every school district in the state that was doing some variation on what you did was out there. Every school district in the nation that was doing distance learning was out there trying to source things in which to ship the food. Was
And
it
not
hard?
just, yeah, you're right. And not just the things to ship the food, the actual food. Because when you go from, like Leanne said, oh, we were going to have spaghetti the next day, you know, now we have to pivot to a bagged grab and go, you know, and I'm like thinking drive through. So again, like I mentioned before, part of my strategy and the businesswoman in me is to stay out of the competition with all my colleagues. Was we have the facility, we have the equipment, we're going to serve hot lunch, because everybody else is sourcing cold sandwiches, deli meat, string cheese, eggs, hard-boiled eggs, anything that's cold packable that meets our USDA school meal pattern requirements, or in this case, the summer food service pattern, meal pattern. And so that also helped us. But it was a mad scramble. I was like, we're going to cash and carry, you know, and we have a big overarching set of procurement rules, regulations that we have to follow. So there are some concessions for emergency purchases, thankfully. But yeah, it was a scramble. And we were, you know, but we are blessed with this beautiful central kitchen facility. So I'm like, get as many t-shirt bags in here as possible. Get as many, you know, we use little brown bags to put our hamburgers in, and our you know, little pizzas and things like that. So, and we have the ability to keep that food hot too, because we have the equipment. But a lot of my colleagues are not as fortunate, like Leanne had mentioned. And so it's been, I mean, and it's been a struggle for us, but you know, like I said, we're blessed with the facility that we have, and we've been able to do that.
Absolutely nobody who has watched thus far is going to think about food services in the school districts in the same way again. Lauren, I think you have another question or two, do you not?
Yes, we do. This next question comes from Pamela, who is watching live. Leeda, what are some of your financial impacts you have experienced this past 6 months, and how will that affect your program as we enter into the new school year with reduced student participation, new packaging processes, and other expenses with staff and additional cleaning processes? Leeda?
So that is an excellent question. We have typically we have about an $8.2 million budget for our department. And, you know, our goal and in our district is we're a service. We don't want to be a burden on the school district. So I run a business within the district that we cover all of our own costs. And so those are food, labor, benefits, everything. So considering everything that's happening, and even funding, when you look at the higher level for schools, you know, it was even more important to me to make sure that we could cover our costs. So again, the businesswoman in me is, what do we have, and how can we best use, like Leanne mentioned, our USDA foods. So again, serving the hot meals and serving as many of those things that we already had procured and had planned to menu, we kept using those items. Right now, we have all of the canned fruit that we got through the USDA foods program. We got little containers and we're cupping it up. And yes, that's labor, but again, it's a savings on the other end. So the other thing we did, like Leanne said, when we went, March 17th to March 18th, we used every bit of food that was already in our existing kitchens and fed basically the meal in motion sites where we were doing the meal pickup at the curbside. We were using all the food that we already had in stock, and used every bit of our inventory. So
Leeda, you have half the participation. You must have less revenue, but you're describing
right.
some increased labor requirements. Right. Have you laid off staff? And if not, how did you balance your business budget?
So like Leanne mentioned, and I guess the best way I can explain this, National School Lunch and Breakfast program is one pot, if you will, cooking on the stove, and it's got its own set of meal regulations and rules. It also has a reimbursement per meal that we receive. The summer food service program, which is another federal pot of money, if you will, that we are currently operating under, provides more reimbursement per meal per breakfast and per lunch, which has pretty much saved our program and allowed us to continue to procure and have staff on site to be able to provide this service. So it is a great thing that waiver was extended.
Leanne, what's the experience throughout the state? Have food service workers been reduced in overall amount, or are districts by and large stitching together solutions along the lines that Leeda has outlined?
I think a little of both. I think they are stitching together solutions, but I think it was about 3 weeks ago that we just, it was not a great week because we were hearing from food service directors anywhere from 40 to 70% layoff of their staff. So
it has happened out there.
Place. Yeah.
Lauren, next question.
Thank you. This question comes from Dawn, who is watching live. Some students feel a negative connotation to free lunch. How is privacy protected? Leeda?
Yes, so I'll address, that was one of the big concerns that I had about us having to go back to the National School Lunch and Breakfast program using this current model that we have to operate under COVID. Right now, doing the emergency feeding, any child 0 to 18 can come, whether doesn't matter what category they are in terms of their free and reduced price meal eligibility. So right there, you don't know, and people are experiencing hardships like they never have before. So it's just come one, come all, whoever needs food, we have it here for you. During the regular school year, when it's very important for us to protect student and families' confidentiality around free and reduced price eligibility. So like in our district, no one knows except for our inter-office sanctum, our staff here that do the free and reduced price meal application processing. But when that eligibility is sent out to the school, all the students come to the meal service line and they punch in their ID number. And their meal is charged or not charged accordingly based on, it's all attached to their student account. And that's even hidden from our staff in the schools. So, we're looking at obviously post-COVID world, barcode scanning and those types of things, and becoming touchless, which we have the ability to do that. But that confidentiality piece is big. And that's why we're super thankful that this program was able to be extended, because prior to the news of the waiver being extended, we mailed out barcode cards to each of our students that had their eligibility, coded behind it. But what we knew was going to happen was that the families who were on free and reduced were going to be the ones who were coming. We didn't think we'd get a lot of paid participation because one, they'd have to go and pick up the meal, even though it's a bargain compared to going to Subway or somewhere else. And it's very nutritionally sound meal. But that was one of my biggest concerns. And I even called Leanne's office and I said, you know, this is just going to become a free and reduced line. And that is exactly what we try to prevent all the time. So very good question.
Lauren, any more?
Yes, we have one last question. Antoinette has submitted one more.
Yeah.
Antoinette asked, do you use any local farmers for the produce? Leeda?
One of the biggest challenges we have is the size of our district. 15,000 meals. Trying to source from a local farm to get the volume that we need is very difficult. So when we have worked with local farmers, we usually do it with like a harvest of the month type of program, or where we know we can procure the amount and make it equitable between our schools and our meal program sites. We also are members of the Puget Sound Joint Purchasing Co-op, and on our bids, they also identify which produce on our bid and on our contract is Washington sourced. So, and like Leanne said, and USDA requires us to have all of our agriculturally grown products have to be sourced from the United States.
Leanne, what's the
I'll add-
statewide view on this?
Yeah, I was going to add, Leeda again runs a very large program and makes just the scale of food that she needs a little bit more difficult. But we do have a lot of schools that do a direct work with local farms. And actually, it was one of the things that my office did during COVID was we worked with the Washington State Department of Agriculture, and we identified farms, especially those that traditionally sell to restaurants and all of a sudden did not have an outlet anymore. So we collected some of that information and we're sharing that out to schools. So because like Leeda said earlier, we were also having a trouble sourcing and the right kind of products and all the products we needed for schools. So we did try to help facilitate that. So it depends on people's facilities, their staff level, if they can process fresh foods. But we do really partner with Department of Ag and really support use of Washington grown products in schools.
And let the record show Leanne knows of what she speaks. She grew up on a farm. She currently operates a small farm and ranch, although I doubt you'd sell to the local schools. I would imagine, however, that there are farmers in Washington State or ranchers in Washington State who produce on a scale that could participate. I'm thinking about State Representative J.T. Wilcox's family and the chicken farm. That's a pretty large scale operation. I would imagine they're selling to schools.
Yeah, and actually, that was one vendor that I had reached out to this spring because we can bring in pallets of their vacuum sealed hard-boiled eggs and put those in our breakfast meals. So yeah, it's for like I said, when Leanne mentioned, for our district, just because of the size, I have to be a little bit careful about making sure we can meet the volumes, but when we can, it's definitely something we do. In fact, Taste of Washington Day is coming up on October 7th, and Bethel is going to be participating in the Washington Apple Crunch. And so you can check our social media and our pages for all the kids crunching their apples at noon or in their class or whatever time, you know. Who knows, we might be back in school by then. So they could be in the buildings by then. So it'll be fun.
All right, you Cougars, time to wrap up here. I want to give you each an opportunity to say anything that hasn't been said, reinforce anything you think especially bears reinforcing, or just make a point about what you hope is the principal takeaway for people that have been watching. Let's start with you, Leeda, and then we'll allow Leanne the last word.
I think one thing I'd like to share just from this fall, and as a takeaway, one of my other kitchen site managers, she's at Bethel Middle School. She came in probably the third day after we had started back, and she said, "Leeda, I can't believe how appreciative people are for the food. She says, even more so than last spring. She's like, I've never seen people hurting like this. People were saying, I'm so glad you're back, because we had to take a little 2-week break between transitioning, and they're just so thankful. And I think the thing I'd like to leave people with is that hunger is real. It doesn't matter where we come from, what our race is, what our religion is, what our background is. We all need nourishment. And for the people who are having or living in a food insecure situation, hunger is real. And we're going to do everything we can to help alleviate that.
Thank you, Leeda. Leanne.
Yeah, ditto to what Leeda said. And as she mentioned earlier, we're both dietitians and we're passionate. And most people that you find working in child nutrition programs are passionate about our belief in what nutrition can do at a very basic level to fuel us through the day. And then on a long-term level to prevent chronic disease and overall health and wellness. These programs are so important. They give nourishment to kids. I mean, there's not much more to say except for that. They're so important, and we're happy that they can be something that families turn to in a hard time. Although this work is hard, especially for Leeda and staff and her colleagues across the state, but how rewarding that in this crazy time, they're out there making sure kids are fed. And that's a pretty important job.
Leanne Echo, Director of Child Nutrition Services at the State Superintendent of Public Instruction's office. Leeda Beha at Bethel School District, Director of Child Nutrition Services. I thank you both very much. That was a fascinating conversation, and I'm deeply appreciative to both of you. I'm appreciative to those of you who are watching. You have given of your most precious commodity, your time. We do not, I am saying for the first time in several months, yet have scheduled another town hall. 29 will happen, but stay tuned. Check our Facebook postings to see when, where, and who. And in the meantime, as always, mask up, wash your hands, maintain social distance, and be healthy. Thank you again for watching.